So thanks everyone for joining. I guess I'll jump right in. My name's Ainsley Woods. I'm a senior analyst with Structure Research. We're an industry-focused research firm that covers the internet infrastructure space. So think cloud, data centers, and the whole ecosystem surrounding that. My main focus is on key data center markets in Canada and Europe. And we recently published an update to our Montreal data center report. So I'm excited to share some of the findings here with you today. I do want to note that all of the numbers and projections that you'll see throughout this presentation include the Quebec City market as well. I'd say this market isn't commonly viewed as part of the Montreal market, but it does have the presence of Hyperscale cloud there that serves end users in Montreal. So we thought it was kind of an important dynamic and merited its inclusion in our report. So here's just a quick overview of how the presentation is going to run. I don't want to take up too much time, so we'll go through a really high-level overview of the Montreal and Quebec City market in about 20 minutes, and I'll set aside some time for Q&A at the end. So as I'm going through, please feel free to write any questions in the Q&A box as we go along, and then I'll address them all at the end. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel after the presentation. So you will have a chance to go back and look at some of these numbers and slides in more detail if that's something that you're interested in. So I want to start by looking at the Canadian data center market as a whole. There's three major data center markets in Canada. We have kind of Toronto and Montreal in the center east of the country and Vancouver on the west coast. Toronto is the financial center of Canada and is home to a good chunk of large enterprises and major tech companies. That's kind of unmatched throughout the rest of Canada. But what Montreal has going for it is that the underlying cost of operating is much cheaper. Power costs are among the lowest globally. Real estate is more affordable there, and the cool climate is highly favorable for data centers. And just to give you an idea of like the power cost difference between Montreal and Toronto, it's about 2.5 to 5.5 cents USD in Montreal, compared with up to 11 cents USD in Toronto. This is a bit of a double-edged sword for Montreal, because with land being easier to acquire and power being easier to find, it could make a shift towards hyperscale self-builds and build to suit triple net leases easier and more common in that market than it would be in Toronto. I'd say because of the cost difference between Montreal and Toronto, that Montreal saw the first wave of cloud build out in Canada. The dynamic has started to shift the other way towards Toronto now, where serving the critical mass of enterprises and end users is becoming increasingly important. Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and IBM all have localized cloud infrastructure in both Montreal and Toronto. But notably, Amazon is still serving the entire country from one region in Montreal. And Canadian data sovereignty has continued to grow in importance. It's becoming more important to house some data on Canadian soil in a colocation environment and then put the rest to cloud. And even if there are Canadian cloud regions, there aren't redundant fiber routes that go through Canada only. A lot of them do dip down into the US. So this could help contribute to colocation demand, particularly for interconnection-oriented colocation. Notably, there are no cloud regions in Western Canada as of yet. This area of the country is still served from Montreal and Toronto, and also from regions on the west coast of the United States. So as data sovereignty and latency become more of an issue, I think it's likely that Vancouver will start to see some cloud activity. I think it's also worth noting that Amazon recently invested in an 80 megawatt solar project about 2 hours outside of Calgary. And they do have a tendency to self-build data centers where they have access to renewables. So that's kind of something I'm keeping my eye on. And Vancouver and Western Canada is the next market that Structure Research has its eye on. We're hoping to publish a report on the Vancouver and Calgary markets later in 2021 as travel and being allowed back into the data centers starts to resume. So here's a snapshot of the Montreal plus Quebec City market. As of 2021, it's about 210 million in market size, and we're forecasting a 5-year CAGR of 13.9%. And this growth is going to be primarily driven by Hyperscale at a 15.7% 5-year CAGR, with retail growth slightly slower at a 10% CAGR. So the separation between interconnection-oriented colocation and the more traditional retail colo that's more focused on just space and power continues to grow. We're hearing that deals in the pipeline are increasingly start with a conversation around space and power, or sorry, around connectivity rather than space and power. So it's going to be the more interconnection-oriented retail colo providers that are driving that 10% 5-year CAGR for retail colo. Before I get into talking about how much megawatts and the supply in the market, I want to walk you through a little bit about structured research methodology for measuring capacity. Previously, we really only focused on measuring what the currently built out capacity is, but we've now expanded this view to include max build out capacity and total capacity, as that kind of gives you a better picture of where the market is heading in terms of what could be built out easily in the next 3 to 6 months versus a year ahead. So just to define that, the current built out capacity is what's live and operational data center capacity, sometimes also called fitted out capacity. Max built out capacity will take this one step further and assumes that the data center is fully built out, and it would include capacity for the data halls that are not yet fitted out. This would not include capacity from confirmed secured sites, land banks, and data centers that are under construction. That information is all captured under total capacity. With that being said, this is what the Montreal and Quebec City market looks like right now. There's just over 150 megawatts of capacity that will be online and operational by the end of 2021. And I'm forecasting that this supply in the market is going to grow at a 5-year CAGR of about 10%, or roughly 15, 20 megawatts per year. On a megawatt basis, the current built-out capacity is 76. The current built-out occupancy, sorry, is at 76% occupied on a square foot basis. Oh, sorry, no, on a megawatt basis, it's 76% occupied, and slightly higher at 78% occupied on a square foot basis. Again, Montreal is not a place where speculative builds happen, so most capacity is brought online to serve pre-established demand. So I expect that these occupancy metrics will stay relatively constant. The data center market in Montreal actually covers a lot of ground. You can see there's like a red section in the center of this map. That's kind of considered the downtown core of Montreal. It's where there's a lot of network density. And Colocation is the dominant interconnection player in this market, and their carrier hotel on Boulevard René Lévesque is also located in this cluster. There isn't too much wholesale space in this downtown core. I do want to note that Urbicon developed a 30 megawatt facility in that region. It's a really nice data center, but it's actually been kind of sitting empty there since 2019. So it's something I'm keeping an eye on. The wholesale data centers started to cluster kind of to the west of the city. This area includes the Techno Park, where Vantage and Colocation had some land. Equinix and E-Structure are also located nearby. And I think this section to the west of the city kind of developed first because it's closer to the airport and has better access to highways. But again, the market is really spread out. So we do see a lot of other wholesale operators on the South Shore with Colocation in Longueuil and the AWS self-build in Varennes. And then not pictured on the map further north, there's some hyperscale presence in Drummondville, and even further north into Quebec City, where there's also some hyperscale. So a pretty spread out market. Just having a look at the cloud on-ramps, I would say kind of early on in the data center industry, carrier neutral was seen as the way to go. You needed to be able to provide your customers with access to a variety of networks. Now I'd say carrier neutrality is just table stakes, and cloud neutrality is the way the industry is trending. So the customers are now increasingly adopting hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, and data centers need to be able to provide connectivity to a wide range of public clouds. So in terms of cloud on-ramps in Montreal, Cologix is kind of leading the way, and eStructure has an AWS on-ramp as well. Equinix has only just entered the Montreal market with their acquisition of the Bell Canada data center portfolio. And I imagine they'll likely be looking to add cloud on-ramps to their footprint as well. Now we'll take a look at this map again, but this time from a hyperscale perspective. Montreal has about 103 megawatts of contracted hyperscale capacity as of 2021. And included in this is our estimate for the AWS self-build in Varennes, which is now online. We do break these regions down into more detail in our report, but for now I'll say that the hyperscale sites, as I mentioned before, cover a lot of ground in Montreal. There's a good sized cluster to the west of the city, also north in Drummondville and Quebec City, which aren't pictured here on this map. And I'd say the self-build is an interesting new dynamic in the Montreal market. We hadn't seen that previously. So the AWS site is located on the South Shore in Varennes, and Google has actually purchased a parcel of land to the southwest of the city in Beauharnois. Also, with the AWS self-build coming online, it appears to have slowed down the growth of at least one of the operators that we believe houses an AWS availability zone. So something we're keeping our eye on, especially as Google prepares to start construction on their site. Talk a little bit about some of the interesting market dynamics we've come across in just speaking to all of the operators in the market. The competitive landscape has been shifting in Montreal. There was more consolidation in the market, with eStructure acquiring Aptam's assets, Equinix picking up the Bell Canada Enterprise data center portfolio, and Vantage acquiring the wholesale operator Hypertech. So the market's now kind of dominated by large US-based providers. With Equinix coming into the market, it adds a little bit more competition in the interconnection-oriented space. It already sounds like they have a number of customers interested in adding locations in Canada. And they disclosed on their recent earnings call that they have picked up an additional parcel of land in Montreal. So we're keeping an eye on how that's progressing. And it also seems that what's been happening in Toronto can impact the growth trajectory in Montreal. So hyperscale cloud growth in a Toronto-based AZ, for example, can impact the rate of growth for AZs in Montreal. We've seen a slight slowing in hyperscale growth since 2018, and this is kind of influenced by a variety of different factors, including the self-builds coming online in Montreal and the new regions opening up in Toronto. But just to add a little caveat to that, Montreal has been going through a period of inventory digestion, and it looks like another wave of expansion could be on the horizon. But again, this is going to be in the form of a mix of self-build and colocation absorption. We had heard from a couple providers that the supply chain unpredictability brought on by the pandemic and other chip shortages has potentially impacted the pace of hyperscale data center absorption. And shortages of parts can impact compute infrastructure deployment timelines. In terms of pandemic impacts, in Montreal, as in many other markets, we've seen a slowdown in IT decision-making, particularly from the enterprise space. And this has created some headwinds for public cloud growth in Canada. Because most of the public cloud infrastructure in Canada is in Quebec, the impact was more immediately felt there. But this has been offset by areas like e-commerce, content, and video conferencing that have surged during the pandemic. So I think moving out of the pandemic, Montreal is positioned to benefit from what's expected to be accelerating cloud adoption. Though the market continues to trend towards wholesale colocation, we have seen upticks in retail colocation recently, specifically in those interconnection-oriented facilities. Some of this was brought on by carriers needing to house more networking equipment to handle traffic surges. Additionally, Cologix has opened up what it calls edge compute pods, which are retail colocation data halls that are in the same building or closely proximate over the network to their hyperscale cloud customers and their on-ramps, which just gives latency in the microseconds instead of milliseconds, which they had a lot of customer interest in, and that product seems to be gaining traction for them. The pandemic has also created challenges for commercial real estate and the large office towers in the downtown core. They're seeing a lot more office vacancies, and those could be repurposed for digital infrastructure. And this could impact the expansion strategies for the providers that do play in that downtown core, like Cologix. So new opportunities could be on the horizon for those premium real estate locations. The pandemic has also fueled a lot of public sector demand in Canada, with government and healthcare shifting online. And I'd say this is more true closer to Quebec City and the Ottawa-Gatineau region, where a lot of the government is centralized, but in Montreal as well. And we've also seen demand tick up from Canadian financial institutions. And these segments are contributing to enterprise wholesale colocation or the retail deployments that are a little bit on the larger scale. So that is pretty much it for my prepared presentation. Our report on the Montreal and Quebec City market goes into a lot more depth. You could check out the free executive summary version on the website. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out about that.